Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. By No Foods, No Grain, No Gluten, No Guilt. And by Audible. Listening is the new reading.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, what happens when you have type 1 diabetes and you own an ice cream shop? Well, you hear a lot of dumb jokes, but you also make sure to know the carb counts of the popular summer flavors.
Oh, I would have to say it's the Pirate Bounty, which has all sorts of stuff in it, or Superman. And I can tell you the Pirate Bounty is 22 carbs per half cup, and Superman is 15 carbs per half cup. And yes, we do spot Dexcoms on arms, and we make sure the parents know we have all the nutritional information and measuring cups.
My guest, Brandon Wallis, also has a little girl with type 1, and he has some good advice for diabetes dads as we head toward Father's Day. Plus, it's off to camp for a lot of kids already this summer or in the weeks to come. I am not sure this was the best idea, but I asked Benny, my son, to give us his take on diabetes camp for our Know Better segment. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to the show. Glad to have you along. If you are brand new, well, this is the first show of our fourth year. Yeah, wow, we rounded the corner, ending year 3 last week, and so here we go. I'm so glad you found us. Diabetes Connections aims to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes by sharing stories of connection. We talk to celebrities, athletes, artists in our community, authors, thought leaders, but also ask tough questions of the healthcare companies and the tech leaders that are pushing things forward. And I love profiling the everyday people, say that in quotes. You may not be climbing Mount Everest or running 25 marathons in a month, but just living day to day with type 1 is enough of a challenge, right? My son Benny was diagnosed with type 1 just before he turned 2. My husband has type 2 diabetes, and I worked in broadcasting for more than 25 years, radio and television, and that's how you get the podcast. So we are traveling here and there during the first 2 weeks of June. And I tell you that because as you listen, the show should be just fine. You shouldn't notice any different, but if you're on social media, some of this stuff is automated, so I may not be as quickly responsive as I usually am on social media, but we will be back to normal or whatever passes forward around here by the middle of June, and definitely by the third week of the month. We just have an awful lot going on, but lots of great stories to tell, and I didn't want to skip a week of the podcast, so here we go. The show notes will be as usual, but again, if you're emailing or if you're posting in the Facebook group or on Twitter, I will get back to you when things get back to normal. Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. One Touch has been a trusted brand in blood glucose management for more than 30 years. This past year, Pharmacy Times and U.S. News & World Report named One Touch as a #1 pharmacist-recommended brand in blood glucose monitoring devices based on a survey of pharmacists nationwide. Find out more about One Touch brand products at diabetes-connections.com and click on the One Touch logo. My guest this week reached out after an episode that aired back in March. You may remember we talked to actor Austin Basis. And he really was a kid in a candy store growing up. His dad owned an actual candy store, but he was diagnosed type 1 at age 8. And he shared some funny stories about, the candies, the sugar-free candy back then that he enjoyed. And Brandon Wallis reached out and commented on that post that he opened an ice cream shop, and then his daughter was diagnosed a few months later. So I just wanted to reach out and talk to him a little bit, get his story, and learn more. Brandon, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
How could you do that to your daughter? What is wrong with you?
That's funny. I've heard that multiple times before.
Have you really? Do people really say stuff? I mean, I was kidding, but you have to have heard it all.
I have, yeah. As a type 1 diabetic myself for 30 years, I did the one thing I wish I could have never have done, and that's pass it on to my 2-year-old daughter. Bless her heart that she is a tough little kid. I swear these kids that are diagnosed with this are given a little different. They're given a little extra edge, I like to say. Most of them are a little more resilient than most. But yes, when my daughter was diagnosed, It was right after we'd opened an ice cream shop. We'd owned a restaurant for 10 years at the time, and we decided to open a restaurant in town, or a ice cream shop in town as well. So we'd also sell candy at, and right after my daughter was diagnosed, yes, you'd be amazed how many people are naive to this disease, and the difference between type 1 and type 2. And I've had people ask me, is it because we fed them too much ice cream?
I shouldn't laugh, because my husband owned an Italian restaurant for many years, and when my son was diagnosed, we got that question as well, although it was more like, wow, did you feed him all that pasta? That must be what it was all about. And, like your daughter, my son was not yet 2. I mean, your daughter was diagnosed right after she turned 2. But, those kids weigh less than 30 pounds. You really can't feed them that much of anything.
No, well, I don't know. The one, my 4-year-old now, the diabetic, she's now 4. I can't seem to keep enough food in that child, which you have to be a little creative with her. But, you'd be amazed. I truly believe that they should change the terminology for type 1 diabetics and type 2 diabetics, as it's so misunderstood on what causes it and how it happens and how different the diseases really are.
So let me ask you, I have some ice cream shop questions for you that I'll save till later. But you mentioned, you've lived with type 1 for 30 years. You were diagnosed when you were about 11 years old. Do you remember your diagnosis? And I guess I'll just ask, all these years later, the difference as to when your daughter was diagnosed?
My diagnosis was at a time where it seemed to be less prevalent. I had been sick for many, many weeks, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, in and out of doctors, etc. And it was actually Mother's Day that my stepdad had said, he's got asthma or something. We're going to put him out on the deck. And they went to a pancake breakfast of some sort, and they came home. And my mom had noticed I was only taking a breath about every 40 or 50 seconds. She knew something was absolutely wrong. I was taken to the hospital. I was actually in a coma, a ketoacidosis coma. They had actually at one point in time told my mom that they didn't know if I was going to come out of it. My blood sugars were so high that even the equipment at the hospital couldn't read my blood sugars. It took them a full day to even get them down to where it was a readable number. My diagnosis, and by the time I came out of the coma, it was very basic. It was, you are type 1 diabetic, and you have to do shots to maintain your life. And at the time, I remember being in the room, and they were telling my mom how diabetics have a less length of a lifespan. We're expected to not live quite as long. I 100% disagree with that, but I remember that conversation, and I remember the doctor saying you have to do shots every day. And I said, absolutely not. I'm not poking myself with needles. I hate needles. And the doctor basically said, you either do this or you won't survive. So from that day, I've given myself my own shots. My parents have never had to give me a shot. I've always checked my own blood sugars. This goes all the way back to right when blood machines were first introduced. That's how long I've had it. So the difference between then and now, then they sent my mom home with some very basic instructions. If his blood sugars get low, good snacks are orange juice and graham crackers. Let's just say my mom fed me so many graham crackers and orange juice over the years that both the thought of graham crackers and orange juice make me nauseous. I think my mom thought that was the only food I was supposed to be fed.
We moms take the doctor's orders very seriously. If we're told graham crackers and orange juice, you're not getting a Fig Newton and apple juice.
Very specific. And it's so interesting, too, now how well we control it compared to back then and how different it is. But when my daughter was diagnosed, we went to the hospital about 11 o'clock at night because I had checked Taylor's blood sugars at home, and my meter said over 600, seek medical attention. I checked her 3 more times. I checked my blood sugars. I checked my wife's blood sugars to see if there was something wrong with my meter. So when we got there, it was about 11 o'clock. And by the time we got into a room and IV drips and our blood sugars were coming down, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. By the time we fell asleep, we got a short nap in about 4 in the morning till about 6:40. We were then woken up, and then we did 3 full days of classes. With the amount of knowledge that I have of type 1 diabetes and A1C that bounces between 5.3 and a 5.6, I thought I was pretty well educated, but they still wanted us to do the 3 days worth of classes before they sent us home. But when you're dealing with a little peanut of 20-something pounds, it's pretty different. I mean, we had to wait for her blood sugars to get to 400 before we could even give her a half unit of a correction to get her blood sugars to come back down. And even then, a half unit, she was crashing all the way down into the 40s within 20 minutes.
Yeah, I'm always amazed when people who don't know toddlers and type 1 try to give dosing advice on the internet. And I'm looking at you, Facebook people, because, people will say, well, my doctor doesn't want me to send my child to bed lower than, or doesn't want me to correct at bedtime lower than 250. And you get this pile on of, are you crazy? You have to correct. And the child is 2, right? And weighs 27 pounds. And a quarter of a unit will drop them. It's a different world, as you say, with the little peanuts.
Yeah. Oh, it's scary, to be honest. And it's frustrating too, to break in and change the conversation slightly. But even then at Children's Hospital, I was just appalled with how they had us in the same room with a little girl that got diagnosed the same night. And here this girl is, I think she was 13 at the time. Her name's Emma. She'll always be part of our family now because of the diagnosis together. But they were teaching us how to manage type 1 diabetes, and they're comparing. There was no difference between a 2-year-old and a 13-year-old that weighed, I don't know what she weighed, 70, 80 pounds. So it's frustrating to see how different, or how they didn't differentiate a child that's 2, give her 15 carbs for free, but you're doing the same thing with an almost full-size adult at the same time. So I wish they would fine-tune it just a little bit more to the size of the child, in a sense.
I hear you, definitely. So I'm curious, did any of the doctors take your diagnosis into account? Did they ignore that you had type 1? Did you feel like they listened to you? Right back to Brandon answering that question. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And one of the best features, the customizable alerts and alarms on the Dexcom G5 Mobile and now the G6. And they provide advance warning of hypo and hyperglycemic events before they happened. Lows and highs. And this has helped Benny now so much. He gets distracted. And that's normal, right? He's playing. He went to a sleepover recently. I think they played Xbox for 5 hours. He did great. And I know that part of that is because of the alarms. It just helps to troubleshoot high blood sugars before they get too high, catch lows before they get too low. And I can alert him if his Dexcom alerts aren't doing the trick, right? Because I can see it on my phone. Talk about peace of mind. I can't imagine using a continuous glucose monitoring system without those alarms. It just wouldn't work for us. Find out more about the Dexcom continuous glucose monitoring system at diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Now back to Brandon talking about being a person with type 1 when his daughter was diagnosed with it and whether that meant the doctors listened to him more.
At first they didn't. When my daughter was first diagnosed, like I said, she was over 600 when we first went in. And with just IVs alone, they got her down into the 200s. And then they wanted to then give her another 10 units of insulin of Novolog to get her blood sugars down. And I'll be honest, I told them to take their hands off my child. I was very adamant that they rethink that process. It was a bit tense. By the time it was said and done, they did finally listen to me as a type 1 diabetic and as a father. Sometimes doctors think they know best, and for the most part they do. But it's the safety of your child. It's amazing how protective you can get, even with a professional that, has gone to school for many, many years. And especially children's. I mean, they're considered some of the best doctors out there, endocrinologists out there.
When you left the hospital after those 3 days, did you leave with insulin pens? I'm trying to think of how different it was from your experience, because you went home, like you said, the blood glucose home meters had just come out. You were still using syringes. Did you think about the differences?
No, we were sent home with just regular syringes.
Oh, that's right, because she's too little for the Novolog.
Yeah. Well, and it was kind of frustrating because when we did leave, we left. They wanted us to do a whole year of insulin shots and manage her diabetes with insulin shots, and it was horrid, to be honest with you. We would do morning hugs, for example, and I would literally have to grab onto her, and it's amazing how strong little 2-year-olds can be. But it took all my power to keep her to not move so we could give her morning insulin shots, and to this day it breaks my heart that I have to do the same thing to my child. But no, we were sent home with the old technology in a sense, but we were supposed to, at the same time, by the time we left, we had convinced them that I had enough knowledge to have a pump and have a CGM. So when we left Children's, we were told we would have a pump and a CGM within 2 weeks. Oh. We followed through with about 2 weeks later, and they still hadn't followed through with their process. We actually had to move away from Children's, as sad as that is, as amazing of a hospital as that is. we had to look for a team that was a little more aggressive, a team that was a little more advanced, a little more modern thinking. And thankfully, we were able to get her on a pump and a CGM. I think it was about 5 or 6 weeks in. And I mean, she was so little at the time, the only place to even put a CGM was on her little butt cheeks. And then on the other butt cheek would be a infusion site for her Animus at the time, where she's used the Animus Ping at the time.
Yeah, that's exactly what we did, minus the CGM, because it really wasn't out yet, or at least in a form that I liked. It wasn't accurate enough yet. Actually, I don't think it was out. I'm trying to think. The first Dexcom, I think, was 2007. So
and that was was it a G7 or something?
It was a G7 Platinum. Yeah.
I tried it, and I used it as a demo for about 2 weeks, and I was about 3 days into it, and I told that doctor, you can have that thing. That thing was worthless. And now I'll tell you, the Dexcom is the one piece of equipment I could not fathom living my diabetic life without. I mean, it has given me a knowledge and a range that I never understood before. It's shocking when you first put a Dexcom on, and I don't debate by Dexcom or anything, but the first time you wear a real Dexcom that's accurate, what you learn, and then all of a sudden I'm hitting A1Cs of 5.1, 5.2, 5.3 with never getting a low. It was, life-changing, like I said.
Well, and that's, you mentioned that earlier. I was going to ask you about those numbers. That's obviously an incredible A1C. This isn't an episode about your A1C, but I'm curious, have you had that control or close to it without the Dexcom? Is it diet? Is it timing? How do you do that?
Before Dexcom, I was hitting 6.5s on occasion, but realistically I was 7. 88 says 7.5. My daughter's at a 5.6. That's pretty unheard of for a 4-year-old, but it's being vigilant. We're very, very vigilant. We do eat lower carb. We don't eat no carbs. We want to still be a normal family in a sense. And we still do own an ice cream shop. As a matter of fact, I was talking about opening a couple more. And we go to the ice cream shop. And because of our knowledge, one of the things that's fun, I swear to God, diabetics seek out other diabetics. It's almost like we have a radar for them. And I wear my Dexcom proudly. I let people know that I have it. And I almost use it as I joke it's my fishing lure. For other diabetics, because I love ending up in conversations with diabetics, and being a restaurant owner as well. We've ended up I have a whole email list, a separate email list of just diabetics that I've met out in the wild, as I refer to them as, and I love answering questions and helping them figuring things out. And there's a little old lady that comes into our store. She's type 1. She has been since she was in her 40s, but very unknowledgeable. And I helped her do things like talk to her doctor about splitting her Lantus for 2 times a day instead of 1, and just little things to help control A1Cs. And then, of course, because you own the restaurant, the diabetics find out, and they start asking you carbohydrate counts on your flatbreads and on your sandwiches. And so it's fun to be able to help do that kind of stuff. And I am a diabetic advocate. I wear my heart on my sleeve, as my wife would say.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad you do. I'm glad you reached out. This is fun to talk to you. I'm hesitant to ask, but I've talked to many adults who have mixed feelings. These are young adults about having kids. They're afraid of exactly what happened to you.
The honest truth to that is, I had always thought, I grew up in a family with 8 kids. We like to say we put fun in dysfunctional, 8 kids, 4 dads, 1 mom. I'm the only one with type 1 diabetes. My cousin, his daughter, ended up with it. But because diabetes is a little more prevalent in Black and in Jewish, my cousin is actually, his dad is Jamaican, and my dad's sister is his mom, and then his wife, Wesley's wife, is Jewish. And what it really comes down to is, I was always told as a child that type 1 diabetes does not run in families. My full-blooded brothers would have less of a chance to getting it than my half-brothers, because it doesn't run in families. It was many, many years later they found out that type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. We didn't know that until, if you want to use the term, recently. Yeah. And that being said, now they do know that it's hereditary, or because it's autoimmune, it is hereditary. I never in my life thought that it would be me that ended up with a child. I just thought, no way. And I still, every time my older daughter, she's 7, every time she goes potty more than normal, or she drinks more water than normal, or she's hungrier than normal, I go into instant radar mode, and it's sad is what it is. And so when my daughter was growing up in a big family was what I was getting at. I always thought I would have 3 or 4 or 5 kids. As soon as my daughter was diagnosed, we stopped. I hate to say it, I couldn't do it to another child. I would never trade what I have for the world. But at the same time, I don't. If I passed it on to one, they say the likelihood, especially daddies to daughters, they say is an increased risk as well. And if you have 2 daughters, your likelihood of a third daughter is pretty high. So it did change my mentality on how many kids I was going to have, and I opted to not have more children because of it. And it's a lot of work. I mean, just flat out, as you know, having a child with diabetes and the anxiety that comes along with it, the fear that comes along with it, the constant stress. I mean, it is 24/7, and we do our best to let her be 4. And we don't say you can't have that because your blood sugars are high, or you can't have that. We just manipulate the situation. We distract her. Like if she wakes up with high blood sugars and we found a lower carb oatmeal that she just loves. But if she wakes up at 300, you have to get the blood sugars down before you go give her 19 carbs.
Yeah. And
so we manipulate the situation. But yeah, it has absolutely changed my outlook. And it just, every time I hear about another child being diagnosed with it, it just breaks my heart, not only for the child, for the parents mainly, believe it or not. As a child that's had it my whole life for the most part, I can handle it. Does it suck? Sure, it does. But I can live with it and I can handle it, and it's just me. But as soon as you hear about somebody else having to deal with it, especially the parents, yeah, it's heart-wrenching, to be very honest.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. It's hard for me to I don't have that perspective, obviously, because I don't have diabetes and I have a child who does. But I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you for that, Brandon.
Yeah, absolutely.
How's the ice cream business these days?
It's an old school ice cream shop. It's called The Social. It's out in Victoria, Minnesota. It's an old school 32 dipping flavors type of ice cream shop. We're constantly rotating. We had a very long winter here in Minnesota. As a matter of fact, 3 weeks ago, I think it was 3 weeks ago, here in Victoria, we ended up with 22 inches of snow. Ugh. So, and then a week later, we had 77 degrees, and we were out on the deck eating barbecue. So, yeah.
How'd you get into the restaurant business?
I've always been an entrepreneur. Started a auto detailing business when I was very young. I ended up selling that business when I was about 19. I actually never finished high school. I got my GED. I was going to go to college, and growing up in a family with no money, I had to have a job to go to college. Ended up working hired by a guy to help get his business off and running. So long story short, it didn't work out between him and I ended up owning an aviation detailing company. Huh. I was one of 6 in the country that did that. Traveled all over the world. So anytime a diabetic tells me they can't do something, I say bull. I was a very physical job. I did concrete work for a while, and cleaning aircraft is more physical than concrete. Fast forward, I had a great run. I decided to sell that company and do something I loved, and that was the coffee business. I sold that company, bought an espresso machine, had nowhere to put it. I finally found a place, and that's how the restaurant came about. And I just have always had a passion for early mornings and crabby people coming in to get coffee at the coffee shop I used to work at. By the time they walked out the door, I had a smile on their face. That's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. It had nothing to do with making coffee. It had to do with putting a smile on somebody's face for the rest of the day.
You're in the hospitality business. That's great.
Yeah, it is. I get to go to work and I get to BS with people. That's what I get to do. There's the part of having to do money and do all that stuff, but my job is realistically it's hanging out with people. That's great.
My first job when I was 15 was scooping ice cream at Baskin-Robbins. I had one of those jobs and wore that brown and pink uniform. And I just remember the ice cream was a lot harder to scoop than I thought it would be when I first started there. Has anything changed in the last, oh gosh, I'll show my age, 30 years?
That's what's funny about it. So you say Baskin-Robbins. Growing up in Edina, when we lived there as a kid, there was a Baskin-Robbins up the street, and God, we did everything I could to make a couple of bucks to ride our bikes up to the Baskin-Robbins. And I always thought, this was a cool thing. So when my wife and I started talking about another business, there's no way I could manage another restaurant. There is no way. So there's an opportunity that came up in the same town on a great little location. And I thought to myself, you know what? That was cool as a kid. I'm going to do the same thing. And ice cream business is awesome because I don't care how long people stand in line waiting to get up there. by the time they get up there, there's a smile on their face, and they just can't wait to try different flavors. It's a blast of a little business to own. But yes, all the kids that work for us, we hire very young kids, and these are their first jobs. And it's hilarious because by the end of the busy season, all the kids have whichever dominant hand they are, that arm's just a little bigger than the other. We call them our one-eyed Popeyes.
That's so funny. What's your big flavor you think for the summer?
Oh, I would have to say it's the Pirates Bounty, which has all sorts of stuff in it, or Superman. And I can tell you the Pirate Bounty is 22 carbs per half cup, and Superman is 15 carbs per half cup. And yes, we do spot Dextoms on arms, and we make sure the parents know we have all the nutritional information and measuring cups.
That is fantastic. Oh, I love it. I'm curious. This is one I can't even answer for my son, so I'll put you on the spot. What do you hope for your daughter? She's only 4 years old. It sounds like she's doing really well. What do you hope for her the next couple years? Don't say a cure, because we all want that.
No, and I don't know how realistic it is. What I hope for her is, like I mentioned in the beginning of the interview, these diabetic kids, I swear to God, they're given a different stamina, a different personality, a resilience to these kids. And most of them I see go and do some pretty spectacular things. What I hope for this little girl is that she gets to educate other people and feel comfortable in her own skin. Because as we know, girls, guys even, when they get to a certain age, they get self-conscious. And I hope that this kid's personality outshines this stupid disease that she has to deal with. I hope she gets to be comfortable in her own skin. I hope that she's able to, if another kid in her grade gets diagnosed, she's able to hold their hand and say, you got this. So
I love it.
Probably the biggest thing for me.
Any advice for dads? Because I don't talk to a lot of dads of the type 1 kiddos, not even here on the podcast. I mean, in real life, many times in the chat rooms and at the meetups, it's the moms. Any advice for the dads?
Yeah, talk to people. Because if you don't, it eats at you. I'll be the first one to tell you, I don't have a temper in any way, shape, or form, but it wasn't long after my daughter was diagnosed. It was very late at night. I think it was 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and her blood sugars, we couldn't keep them up that night, and she's falling asleep sitting at the table, and I'm trying to get her to eat, and I thought, okay, one of her favorite foods is eggs. Let's get some protein in her, see if that'll help get her blood sugars to stabilize. And, I just had this moment of sheer anger. And she didn't see it. My wife didn't see it. Nobody saw it. The only person that saw it was a pan and a kitchen counter. You can figure it out from there. And it's because I didn't talk about it. I just swallowed it and said, no, I could do this. And when I see other diabetic parents, I kid you not, hours can disappear in our conversations because they get it. They get what we are going through like nobody else. And if you don't deal with this disease with little ones, you just don't get it. So for dads, you talk, reach out. If you see another dad on a Facebook page having a conversation, send them a private message, because my guess is that dad's out there really literally looking for other people to talk to about it. So talk about it. Don't be the typical male and swallow it.
Brandon, thank you so much for talking. I wish you and Taylor and your wife and your older daughter so well. Thanks for being with us today. This was great.
Absolutely. Thank you much.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
It was really interesting to talk to Brandon, and that all came about because he just commented on a post, when I interviewed Austin Bases, and he talked about being a kid in a candy store. And then Brandon reached out. So please feel free, always make a comment, shoot me an email. That's what this podcast is all about, telling your stories. And I will link to the ice cream shop. As he said, it is the Social Ice Cream Parlor in Minnesota, and they have a Facebook page too, so we will link all of that up. And, we have guests on who have different points of view, certainly. And if you listened recently, a couple of weeks ago when we talked to the folks from Sugarland, from WNYC Sugarland, I got on my soapbox about not changing the names of type 1 and type 2 and how they really need to be one community. And as you heard, Brandon, he disagrees. And I didn't think that it was the right time to stop him and have that discussion. That wasn't what we were talking about, this show topic. But I am happy to have people with different points of view on this show. I have a radio friend who always says for his show, agreement is not required. And I think that's how we'll operate here too. So if you were waiting for me to comment on that when he was talking about it, that's not going to happen because we were talking ice cream. And I think that's okay. There's a place for it. And I want people to feel free to air their views here. You know me, I'll give pushback if I think it really warrants it. But I'm glad he came on and told his story. All right, so let's talk a little bit about diabetes camp. Now, way back when, first year, probably the first 6 weeks, I did an episode about diabetes camp, talking to some staffers from our camp here in North Carolina, including the camp director. One of my favorite staff members came along and talked as well. And I'll link up that episode because I think it gives, I'll be honest with you, the audio is a little cruddy, those early episodes, man. But it gives you a good perspective about what goes on at camp, why it's important in a psychosocial way, that sort of thing. So if you're thinking about sending your child to camp next year, or you have a kid who's going to camp in the next couple of weeks, I just wanted to give you a little bit more information. So that's a great episode. I want to see how this one is received. I decided to talk to Benny about his thoughts on camp. That's our No Better segment this week. No Better, brought to you by No Better Food. What makes it better? Well, they're made with superfoods. You know this stuff. Chia, flax, coconuts, almonds, and egg whites. Really good for you stuff that they put together in a way that, tastes like bread. No grain, no gluten, no wheat, no dairy. There's no peanuts. There's no yeast. It is amazing. Pancakes, waffles, croutons, wraps, whatever you can think of, they've got it. And I'm gluten-free since the fall, and I absolutely love No Foods. I had a half of a chocolate chip cookie the other night. The cookies are pretty big, and I have eaten one I've eaten the whole one at a sitting. It would have, I don't know why I'm telling you I ate half a cookie, but I only ate half a cookie. And so I'm going to eat the other half tonight. Find out more. You can go to diabetes-connections.com, click on the No Foods logo, and use the promo code Stacey10 to save at checkout. Benny has been going to diabetes camp, Sleepaway Diabetes Camp, since he was 7. We're very fortunate to have a day camp around here. It's a 3-day program, but he's been going there since he was 4. But he has been, honestly, a little bit more articulate about his camping experience in the past. I will link up some blog posts that he helped me out with when he was younger. But he's 13 now. He's a complete goofball. We're also trying out some new equipment. My house is a circus, so you may hear my husband walking in and out and the kitchen cabinets closing. And, Benny had a new microphone in front of him, so he was messing with it. All of that to say, we tried. Oh, and I should mention, he mentions Jeffrey. Jeffrey is his counselor. He has known Jeffrey since he's probably about 3 or 4 years old. So that's who he's talking about there. And, so here we go. When you're at diabetes camp, okay, what would you explain it? How would you explain it to someone who's never been? Like a kid with type 1.
It is, you have to go because it's awesome and fun.
What's fun about it? Like, what do you do at Carolina Trails? Tell me what a typical day is like, maybe.
Okay, so we wake up, we go to breakfast late by 20 minutes.
Are you late because you're dragging or because your counselors are?
No, we're late because my whole cabin doesn't wake up. And then we do stuff. We go to the lake, we zip line, we canoe, we go on the banana slide, which is a giant slide. There's a archery, riflery, go to the pool. Sometimes we go up to a little hill and it's a big field and we play a bunch of games. We go hiking. Yeah.
Do you ever just talk to other campers or is it too busy to talk?
We have snack and you just sit down for 10 minutes. And then the worst part is during meals when you have to go to your nurse and be like, I had this many carbs. And I have to bolus this many units. No, let's do this many.
Okay, wait, back up. So tell me what happens at meal times at your camp?
When you eat the food, you have to know how much food you ate. And then they have a board that tells you how many carbs are in a serving or so. And then at the end, you have to go to the nurse. And she's like, how many of these did you have?
Okay, so as you're making fun, what they're doing is double checking that you're counting carbs correctly?
Yeah, and then, no, but you can't just bolus. You have to go up there and I get it for the younger units, but and people that have had diabetes for 3 years or so. But for people like me that have been there since 5 or 6 and have had diabetes for 11, 12 years, it's really annoying.
What kind of food do they have at camp? Is it good? Is it gross?
They have disgusting bacon. The eggs are like eggs you get at like a bad fast food restaurant. The scrambled eggs. But everything else is pretty much really good. They have like toast. They have a breakfast bar with like yogurt and fruit and stuff. And then the other meals, they have like salads and stuff there. And it's really good.
At your camp, I know they do some interesting things when kids do something for the first time.
When someone does something for the first time, like something special, during like lunch or dinner, your counselor will go up to like the microphone and say, Jimmy Joe put his inset in his arm for the first time. And then everybody stands up and they clap. And then we sit right down.
Did anything like that ever happen to you?
I put my inset in my side for the first time, and Jeffrey said, good job, Benny, you did good. And then he went up to the mic and said, Benny put his inset for the first time in his side, and then everybody clapped.
What was that like for you?
It was embarrassing, because like everybody was like, woo!
But was it kind of fun?
Yeah.
Do you feel safe, like with all the medical people there?
Safer than I need to.
What does that mean?
It means there are way too many people trying to keep you safe, and they're trying too hard.
So they check you all the time and stuff?
Yeah.
Do you think maybe you're just a little too casual about things?
No. They wake you up at like 2 a.m. Be like, you need to check your blood sugar. They wake everybody up. Even when you're like 100. When you go to bed, they're like, no, wake up.
What would your diabetes life be like without camp?
The same.
So camp did nothing for you. We shouldn't send you?
No, it's fun. I probably learned a couple tricks there, but I don't remember any of them.
Well, thank you.
Oh, Jeffrey forced me to put the inset in my side. We wouldn't have that.
You did it in your thigh once too, remember?
Oh, that was from Claire. I think it was her. She did it, and she was like, you should do it. And then I did it.
Is it easier to try something like that when somebody else does it?
Yeah.
Why?
Because it's easier. It just is. Human nature is like, oh, I'm not doing that. Oh, you're doing that. Okay, I'll do it.
All right, so I do think the bottom line came through, right? Seeing other people, being around other people with type 1, feeling like it's just the way it is instead of being the only one can really help you through those difficult experiences. So please remember your diabetes camp experience may vary. Your child may love the eggs. Your child may not mind the carb counting nurse. And oh my gosh, I feel like when I see that nurse, whoever it is this year, they're going to just give me the stink eye. But I wanted Benny to be honest and give you what goes on in his brain. So there it is. And one more quick camp story. It's funny. The first year we sent him to not diabetes sleepaway camp. Both of my kids, as I've mentioned in the past, go away to regular camp, for several weeks. They're now about 4 weeks every summer. But the first year Benny went, he was 8 and he went for 2 weeks. It's pretty general for kids that age, their first year. And the nurse or the staff at that camp was nervous about a kid that young with type 1, and we had systems in place. I've told that story before. I'll tell it again in a longer format. But my point right now is one of the things they did was watch what he ate, and he hated that. Interestingly, he doesn't really complain about it from diabetes camp. I mean, I pulled it out of him this time, but that's the first time he's ever in the 6 years he's been going to diabetes camp. I actually didn't know that they did that. I thought the kids were just responsible for counting the carbs, especially the older kids, and adding it up. I didn't realize that happened at Camp Carolina Trails, but he told me right away when he came home from regular camp. And you know why? I think it's because he was the only one, right? Nobody wants to be singled out. And certainly, gosh, I don't want somebody looking at what I'm eating every meal and saying, how many carbs in that? Oh, are you really going to eat that second piece of whatever? And, even to an 8-year-old who's not, he's not sneaking 17 cookies, I hope, but he wasn't, right? It's uncomfortable, especially when you're the only one. And I think that was the big difference there. Okay, I hope I haven't scared anybody away from diabetes camp. It's just a terrific experience. And we have a new sponsor, recently signed on, Audible. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. They like to say listening is the new reading. But they're offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. You just go to the link in the show notes or at diabetes-connections.com. Click on the link to Audible, and that is it to get your free audiobook today. I am reading or listening to The Princess Diarist This is Carrie Fisher's memoir of Star Wars. I guess, I haven't started it yet. I just downloaded the book, but I guess she found the journals she kept during the first Star Wars movie. So these are excerpts from her handwritten notebooks. It won the 2018 Grammy Award for Best Spoken Word Album, and I'm so excited to listen to it. I was such a big Carrie Fisher fan, and I continue to be, so sad to lose her. But I'll let you know when I get back from all my travels what I thought about the book, whether I'll recommend it. I'll be honest about that because it may stink. It probably doesn't, though. If you've got a book you're reading or listening to, let me know. Love to check it out on Audible, and be sure to click on those links to get your free 30-day trial and your first download free. Quick note about sponsorship. I want to let you know as you listen that we now have 4 sponsors for the show. As you're listening, that's it. I'm not adding any more. 4 was always the goal. We'll see how it goes. If it gets too heavy, if we're weighted down with advertising obligations and behind-the-scenes sponsor stuff, or if it just sounds crummy, we won't keep it that way. But I will say, when I started the podcast 3 years ago, I vowed that I would not ask listeners to donate money. I think people who are touched by type 1 pay enough for everything we need. And while I hope this has become a really good source of information for you, I think it would be difficult to justify paying for it. So while there are programs in place where you can donate to podcasters, and I respect anyone who does that. This is my personal and business choice. The reason that there are commercials now is because I'm not going to ask you to pay. So that's the deal. You can always let me know what you think. I'm always going to be upfront with you, but 4 was always the goal, and 4 is also the limit. Doesn't mean I may not be working with other sponsors in other ways, but when it comes to the podcast, I think this is a satisfying level. Okay, as I said, I'm really not on social media for much of the beginning of June. It'll be on and off for a while. I will respond to emails and comments as I can, but lots of moving parts in this crazy family. So when we settle down a bit, I will tell you more about that. Happy to explain and hopefully share some cool stories. I hope your summer is off to a great start. Next week, cool show coming up. I'm really excited about this one. We have an interview with a pediatric endocrinologist who does a presentation called The 10 Things I Get Called About in the Middle of the Night. So, of course, we have to run down the list. She was kind enough to share with us, and I think this will be a great experience to get into the mind of an endo and find out, what is their true reaction when we're calling them at 2 a.m? What are some things that they're really happy that we called them about? What are some things we should be able to handle on our own? And it's a fun interview and a great talk. The 10 things I get called about in the middle of the night. Thanks, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Cannot thank him enough. And thank you as you listen to Diabetes Connections. I'm thrilled you're here. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.
They bring a visitor in. You should be the visitor one year.
Oh, that's nice.
You should be like, "Hi, I'm Betty's mom, and I do podcasting."
Who was the guest last year?
I forget his name, but he was
Cochran.
Yeah, that guy. He was an Olympic athlete. Wait, no,
All right, try again.
He was on Wipeout.
No. He's American Ninja Warrior.
Oh, same thing.
Nice.
Same thing.
All right, that's enough.
He was on the Ninja Warrior Americans.